Simpson said, hello, young woman. My pippins are lovely today. Don't be suspicious of golden delicious. Whatever your granny might say, they're only apples, red and green.
The first time I set foot into this orchard, I felt at home. It's of a traditional design where, for example, trees are planted equidistant apart, but what I noticed were the anomalies. The missing trees, the tree that is bent over, the circle of trees that forms a natural enclosure. And what I began to envision here were figures which would rise up from the ground to occupy these spaces. I am essentially an urbanite, having grown up and lived in cities all of my life. And although I felt very comfortable here, I really needed to do some research into orchards, how they are designed, and also the life process of the apple and the apple tree. So one of the first things I did was visit the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford to view an exhibition of 500 years of botanical drawings. I did my own drawings as well as study photographs of plant life, as well as my own photographs of trees, in order to get ideas for shapes and forms for these sculptures. Once I decided to focus on a context of the 4 seasons of the year for these sculptures, I then began with clay to work out ideas on a small scale. The first maquette I made was this one, autumn, then spring, and then summer. These sculptures came fairly quickly and easily to me. However, how to represent winter, on the other hand, was quite a struggle. One day I glanced around my studio and saw this small ceramic sculpture I had done several years ago. I liked the twisted and tortured nature of it and decided I could adapt it. And so I fashioned a bud on the top. So now I think it looks like these figures are emerging from a frozen earth. After finishing the maquettes, I then scanned the images to make large-scale drawings, and it's from these drawings that I went on to the next step, which was to work large scale and make the clay originals. Each full-scale sculpture used on average about 250 kilos of clay. I used the same method when constructing all of the various sculptures, which was to build a wall around a central armature, and to anchor the clay to the armature I used what are called butterflies. In this way, all of the sculptures are basically hollow. Once the clay originals were finished, they were then prepared for the next stage, and that is the making of a plaster waste mold. This is Marcus, who worked with me on the first mold, and here you can see he's taking the liquid plaster and flicking it onto the clay original. We use a flicking motion so as not to trap any air bubbles between the clay original and the plaster, and in this way we are assured to get a very smooth interior of the mold. This project used about 30 bags of plaster, each bag weighing 25 kilos. So we used a lot of plaster, and there was a lot of flicking going on. After the plaster was applied, scaffolding was attached in order to make the mold secure and strong. On the top we leave a hole, and into the hole is poured water. The water seeps into the clay expands and swells, allowing us to separate the different pieces of the mold. We then scoop out the clay, clean off the mold, put the pieces back together, and allow the pieces to dry. Again, this was the method used for all of the various sculptures. The only different approach was with this very tall winter figure, where I made the mold as I went along because of the challenging shape of this sculpture. For strength, I created the mold along with the modeling of the sculpture itself. The next stage of the process was for me the most fun and interesting because it allowed me to produce a palette of colors. Whereas a painter would use, say, oils or watercolors, I used fiberglass as my medium. I laid the colored fiberglass into the mold, adhering it there with resin, which is at that point in its liquid form. The project used 150 kilos of resin and over 400 meters of fiberglass and lots of disposable gloves. When the resin hardens, the cast is taken out of the mold by chipping away at the plaster. Once the casts emerge from the molds, they just need a little bit of tidying up. The last stage is the application of a polish onto the surfaces of each sculpture. The polish recedes into the pitted areas, producing a contrast between the rough and the smooth textures, as well as enhancing the colors. This is Jeff, who sprayed a UV varnish onto each sculpture. These pieces will be on display in the orchard for the entire year, so I wanted to give them an extra protection from the elements. For this project, I attempted to combine many different art methods and techniques and approaches, and I hope what I have done is made what I like to think of as paintings in the round.